Good afternoon, grade 11 geography learners and educators, and welcome to our last telematics broadcast for geography for this year. We will be focusing on exam techniques. In other words, things that you need to know how to do when you write your exam. So, when we are preparing for an examination, there are two things that we need to do. Three things, in fact. The one is that we need to study the work. The second thing is that we need to practice by answering past question papers, by going through old questions that have been asked in previous years. And the third thing is to prepare ourselves for how we are going to answer the exam. Now, if any of you were watching the rugby final, the World Cup rugby final on Saturday night like I did and like millions of other people across the world were doing, the one thing that you would have realized that in order for our beautiful, beautiful Springboks to have won that World Cup, they had to prepare, they had to study. And what is they studying? They're practicing on the field. You sit and study with your books, with your notes. They were practicing, they were out on the field training and getting in all the exercise and practicing for the World Cup. But they also have what they call a strategy coach, where they plan how they are going to approach various things. A rugby team does not approach a line-out in the same way that it would approach a scrum, for example. And you need to practice and prepare for your exam in exactly the same way so that you can win your World Cup, which is your grade 11 final examination. So without any further ado, let's move on with our exam techniques. So, the first thing I want to look at with you this afternoon is the structure of the question paper. Now, you should know by now that the question paper has changed in structure over the past 2 or 3 years, and we are going to look at the new structure, just in case you are not familiar. So, you will write a paper 1, which will cover physical geography, in other words, the climate and weather section, and then also the geomorphology section. Your paper will be out of 150 marks, and it will be 3 hours long. So now you know I've got 3 hours to answer the paper. I've got to answer 150 marks worth of questions in that 3 hours. So now you can start timing yourself. Further information. There are 3 questions in the question paper. And from the slide in front of you, you can see that the first question deals with climate and weather. And there are 4 questions of 15 marks each, giving me a total of 60 marks for the climate and weather section. The very first question, typed in red, where it says climate SQ, the SQ is an abbreviation for short questions. So, we have short questions. We will have a look at these short questions immediately after this, but these are your one-word answers, match the columns, etc. 15 marks worth of that. Then there will be 3 questions that will be based on either a diagram or a graph or an infographic, etc., worth 15 marks each on a different subtopic of climate. Then question 2, also worth 60 marks, same structure as question 1, covering this time the geomorphology section. Here we once again also have 15 marks worth of short questions, and then 3 questions that will be based on various sources, 3 source-based questions worth 15 marks each one on a different geomorphological topic. That gives me 120 marks. The final 30 marks comes from the Mapwork question. And the Mapwork question in this paper covers physical, so you will get questions related to your climate and weather over here, and you will get questions related to your geomorphology over here in the Mapwork paper. And now you can notice that we have map skills and calculations worth 10 marks. So here you could be asked anything like calculation of distance, calculation of area, bearing, etc., gradient, etc. Then the application and interpretation of the map. Here's where you can be asked the climate questions and the geomorph questions. 12 marks will be allocated to that section. And then 8 marks worth of GIS questions, giving me 30 marks in total. 30 plus 60 plus 60 gives me 150 marks. Please note also that one paragraph type question, and we are going to unpack these paragraph type questions in this presentation. One paragraph type question will occur in each of questions 1 and 2. So one of these 3 questions here will have an 8-mark paragraph question in it, and one of these 3 questions here would have an 8-mark paragraph question in it. And that's the structure of paper 1. When you get to your paper 2, it is very, very similar, except that now we are looking at the human geography component. Once again, it is 150 marks. The paper, it is worth 150 marks. And once again, you have 3 hours in which to complete the paper. Question 1, in this case, covers the section on development. Short questions, 15 marks. And then 3 questions based on a source, 3 source-based questions worth 15 marks each on different subtopics of the development section, giving me a total of 60 marks for question 1. In question 2, you will be tested on the topic resources. And once again, 15 marks worth of short questions covering resources, and 3 source-based questions on various subtopics in the resources section, once again giving me a total of 60 marks. The Mapwork question is also very similar to question 3 in paper 1, except that now the focus will be on the human section of geography. Once again, 10 marks will be allocated to map skills and calculations, and usually the skills and calculations that you are asked here should be different to the ones that you were asked in paper 1. You will also get some application and interpretation questions with 12 marks, and here the questions will cover development and resources. You are not going to get questions based on climate, on weather, on geomorphology in paper 2. And then once again, 8 marks for GIS, giving me a total of 30 marks in paper 2. And once again, in both question 1 and in question 2, you can expect a 8-mark paragraph type. Question 1 of those 15-mark questions will contain an 8-mark paragraph type question. So now you know what the structure of the paper is like. Try to get hold of your school's paper 1 and paper 2 of last year so that you can have a look at it, so that when you see your final paper 1 and your final paper 2, nothing in there will be a surprise to you. You know exactly what that question paper is going to look like, how many marks worth of questions in each of the sub-questions in the question paper. So you will be prepared and you'll feel much more confident when you open up your question paper and it looks exactly the way you expected it to. That will elevate your levels of confidence and make you feel better about answering your question paper. Let's move on. I'm now going to look at the cognitive levels. What does this mean? When your teacher, when your examiner, the person setting your paper, sits down to set that question paper at grade 11 level, 30% of the questions that are asked are what we term or what we call lower order questions. These are questions that test your knowledge, what you know about the topic, and what you remember. They are generally your easier questions. Almost all of you listening to this broadcast should be able to score full marks in these questions, in the lower order questions. And you can identify these questions by the action words, the verbs that you find in these questions. Name, give, define, identify, list. these are the action words that are used to introduce these lower order questions. And when you see these questions, you know that you don't have to give long answers. They are generally not paragraph type questions. They are usually one-word answers or very short questions, very direct and easy to answer. Then 50% of our questions will be middle order. And here, your teacher is testing your understanding of the work. Right? The lower order, do you know the work? Do you remember certain things? With the middle order, do you understand what you've been taught? Can you apply what you've been taught in everyday situations? And in these questions, most of you should be able to answer most of these questions. There are some middle order questions that are closer to the higher order end of things, and they might be a little bit more difficult, but most of you should be able to answer almost all of your middle order questions. And if we have a look at the slide, we will see that the verbs, the action words used to describe the middle order questions or to introduce the middle order questions are words like discuss, explain, show, illustrate, describe. Now, if you look at those words, let's look at the word discuss. You cannot discuss something by giving a one-word answer. Discuss means you need to talk about it. So when you're answering middle order questions, here's one exam technique. You need to ensure when answering middle order questions that you are using full sentences, that you are refraining from giving one-word answers. Now let's move across to the higher order questions. These make up 20% of the questions in your question paper. And they test your analyzing skills, your analytical skills, and your evaluating skills. How do you use what was taught to you in the classroom to analyze situations, to evaluate situations, and to come to solutions to challenges or problems that people face, depending on which topic we are looking at? So the higher order questions make up 20% of the questions, and they are usually the more difficult questions. These are often your paragraph type questions and your longer questions. Now let's have a look at what the action words are that introduce these particular types of questions. So if you look at the slide in front of you, you will see that the action words such as evaluate, justify, predict, assess, construct, and argue are words which are used when asking these questions. And obviously, I do not have to remind you that once again, as with the middle order questions, you cannot be offering one-word answers. These questions are usually your 4 times 2, where we want 4 facts for 2 marks, or your 3 times 2, or even 2 times 2 questions. But they expect much more of you than when you are answering a lower order question. Right. Here is a list of action verbs. Ask your educators to print this for you. Each of the teachers in the Western Cape will be receiving this PowerPoint presentation, so they could print this slide for you. Okay, remember. What do I mean by remember? When you are expected to remember information or to remember things that you've been taught, how will you be asked to remember things? Define, name, describe, give, identify, list. All those action verbs require you to remember things, to remember information, to remember work that you've been taught in the classroom. The next thing that you need to be able to do is to understand. And when we look at the understand column in the slide that's going to appear in front of you now, here you will see words like summarize, classify, compare, contrast, relate, and explain. And the difference between the remember column and the understand column is that your remember column would be your lower order questions. Your understand column, and the next one that you can see, the apply column, where they ask you to solve, construct, demonstrate, modify, produce, and use. Those would be your middle order questions. And then the three columns that you see at the bottom of the slide, the ones that say analyze, where we have to connect, relate, categorize, illustrate, conclude, or devise. The column headed create, where you could be asked to design, to construct, to investigate, to make, to invent, to develop. And then the column that says evaluate, here you will encounter action words like assess, justify, argue, judge, defend, predict. Those would then be your higher order questions. So I do not expect you to remember every one of these action verbs and where they fit in. But if you work through past papers, a good idea is to use the slide that you've just looked at, look at the past paper, and then try to categorize the questions in the paper as lower, middle, and higher order questions. And in that way, you will soon be able to identify a particular order of questions just by looking at it. And that will inform you as to how you have to answer the question. Because if I know it's a lower order question, where I'm going to get 1 mark, or maybe 2 marks, 1 mark, 2 facts, 1 mark each, I'm not going to write long paragraphs. I'm not going to waste my time. And similarly, if I can see that this is a higher order question, where I'm expected to give 3 or 4 facts for 2 marks each, I'm going to offer a little bit more in my answer. I'm going to write in full sentences. I'm not going to give one-word answers, because I can see this is a higher order question where more is expected from me and where I have to use full sentences, give full explanations. And learners, grade 11 learners, identifying your lower, middle, and higher order questions is a skill that will serve you well in your grade 12 final exam next year, because that is going to be our ultimate World Cup final when we write that grade 12 exam at the end of the year 2024. Next, we are going to look at the types of questions that you can expect in your final exam. 3 types of questions. Firstly, the short questions. Now, we spoke about those short questions before. There are 15 marks worth of short questions in question 1 of both papers, and 15 marks worth of short questions in question 1 of paper 2 as well, okay? Then there's your data response questions. Those are the ones where you will get a graph or a table or a picture or a cartoon, and then questions will be based on the data that you are expected to answer on. And then thirdly, you get your paragraph type questions. That's your 4 times 2 is equal to 8 question, of which you will answer 4 in total. 2 of them in paper 1 and 2 of them in paper 2. Now, you must know, how do I deal with each of these questions? When I get short questions, what do I do? You need to know this before the time. You must not be sitting in the exam room trying to figure out, oh my goodness, what do I do here? What am I supposed to do here? How do I deal with data response questions? What do I do when I receive a paragraph type question? And I'm going to show you now what to do with each of these 3 types of questions. So, excuse me, your short questions, there will usually be 2. There will usually be 2 short questions. 1 will be 7 marks and 1 will be 8 marks. The types of short questions you can expect. There are basically 6 types, or different variations of them. So the first one, choose the correct answer in brackets. So this is where you get a sentence, either defining something or describing something, and then there will be two words in brackets, and you have to choose which of the two words fits in with that sentence, which is the correct word that fits in with the sentence. The second type of short question is where you have to refer to a diagram and choose. So you'll get a diagram, and on the diagram there will be labels, and you will get a set of questions. And each label on the diagram will be the answer to one of the questions. So from the diagram that you are given with the labels on them, each of the questions from number 1 to number 7 or from number 1 to number 8 will be one of those labels on the diagram. So you basically need to match the description that you are given in the question with the label on the diagram. That's the second type of short question. Let's look at the third type of short question, where we have to match the columns. That's simple. You've been doing that literally since grade R, where you get the column A and the column B, and you need to match the contents of column A with that of column B. The number 4, the type of short question number 4, is very similar to number 1, but whereas with number 1 you get 2 options for each statement that is made, here you get a list of words or terms, either right at the start of the question or at the end of the question. And so you'll get a list of 10 words, for example, or 10 phrases or 10 terms, and then you get 8 statements. And then you need to take the phrase or the answer from the list that matches each of the 8 statements or each of the 7 statements. Multiple choice short questions, these ones you are also used to. Here you get the question, and then you get 4 options, of which one is the correct answer, and you are usually required to only write down the letter of the correct answer. And learners, I just want to spend a little bit of time here. In the grade 12 final exam, if you are asked with a multiple choice question, say here are a series of questions, choose the correct answer in each case, only write down the letter of the correct answer. Please do not waste your time, because normally you get a letter, number A, and then there's a definition next to it. Don't waste your time writing down those long definitions. If the question says only write down the letter and 1.1 corresponds with D, then you just write a capital D next to 1.1. And 1.2 corresponds with F, then next to 1.2 you just put a capital F. If you are requested, if you are asked, only write down the letter of the correct answer, follow the instruction. The question asks you to only write down the letter, then you only write down the letter. Okay? You could lose the marks by not doing what you are asked. And then the last type of short question, if we go back to our slide, are your direct short questions. Here there are no columns, and there are no diagrams, and there are no words in brackets. You are just asked a question, and you need to give an answer from what you know, from your knowledge, and it is usually a one word or a one phrase answer, very short answer. And here you need to score well, okay? You need to get good marks here. You need to score well. With your short questions, your 15-mark short questions, you should be attempting to get full marks. You should be attempting to get the full 15 marks, because these make up part of your lower order questions. All right, now you know what to expect with the short questions. Let's move on to the data response questions. And I'm hoping that by now you are well aware of what we call the questions that geographers ask. If your teacher has not dealt with the questions that geographers ask or spoken to you about it, please ask him or her to spend a little bit of time with you elaborating on what these questions are. I'm going to go through them with you now, and you will see when I'm done how answering these particular questions will help you to understand your work much better irrespective of the topic that we are covering in geography. So let's go back to our slide. And there are a list of questions. So the first question that geographers ask is, what is it? So it doesn't matter which topic you are looking at in geography, that question can be asked. What is it? What is this that I'm looking at? Where is it? What's the location? Where will I find it? Where is it that this happens? Why is it here? What has caused it to be here? What are the processes that have caused this phenomenon to be in this place that I'm looking at? What does it look like? What happened? In other words, how did it form? How did this come about? What is the impact of this on people? And lastly, how can this be managed? Now, I'm going to look at various questions from past papers, and each of the questions that I'm going to look at, I will link to one of these questions that geographers ask. So, if you are studying, write these questions down. So if you, for example, are studying mudslides or rock falls, ask the questions. Let's say I'm looking at mudslides. What is it? That's the definition of a mudslide. It's where you have a slope and a part of the slope gives way, comes sliding down because it consists of a mixture of soil and water, which is mud, that after heavy rainfall becomes loose and detaches itself from the slope and slides down. Where does it occur? It occurs in hilly areas. It cannot occur in flat areas because you need gravity for the mud to slide down the slope. Why does it occur there? Because in that area there's a lack of vegetation which keeps the soil together, because in that area the slopes are very, very steep, because it has been raining. Those are reasons why it has occurred there. What does it look like? So now you can look at the picture or diagram of an area where a mudslide has occurred. So you've got the slope where a section of the slope has washed away and has come sliding down, and lower down you've got either agricultural land or buildings, etc., that have been covered in mud. What happened? I've already explained what happened. What's the impact? We lose crops, people lose their lives, etc., etc. How can it be managed? By planting vegetation along the slopes, by not building at the bottom of slopes that are prone to mudslide, etc., etc. So by answering those questions, I've now very, very quickly, I've left that a lot, I know, but I've very, very quickly gone through the topic of mudslides. And by answering those 7 questions, I know everything that I need to know about mudslides. And you can apply those same 7 questions to any topic in your geography curriculum. Now, if we go back to our slide, we will see that the what is it questions, if I want to apply the cognitive levels to these questions, the what is it questions are definitions. They are lower order. As are the where is it questions. They are also lower order questions requiring the location of the geographic phenomenon you are studying. Why is it there? Now we need to start thinking. Now I need to give a reason. This is a middle order question where more reasoning is involved. I need to think. What does it look like? Often I've got to draw or I've got to describe what it looks like. Once again, a middle order question. What happened? How did this mudslide occur? What caused this mud to come sliding down the slope? Here you need to explain a process. And this question could be anything ranging from a middle order to a higher order question. As does the next one. What is the impact? We asked, what's the impact? How does this affect us as human beings? Crops can be destroyed. Villages can be cut off from major cities. Roads can be covered, which means that there will be no transport. Communication will be difficult, etc. These can also be middle to higher order questions. And then the last question that geographers ask, how can it be managed? That will also be your middle to higher order questions. And that is usually your paragraph type questions. The last 3, the what happened, the what is the impact, and how can it be managed, are usually your paragraph type questions. Go out, identify these questions in past papers. And you will notice that as one moves from the what is it all the way down to the how can it be managed, your questions become marginally more difficult as we move from our lower order questions all the way to our higher order questions. Right. So let's look at rockfalls. I've spoken about mudslides now, but the same topic, the topic here would be mass movements, the section on mass movements that you do in geomorphology. Let's look at rockfalls this time. What is it? Here you are expected to give a definition of what a rockfall is. That would be a lower order question. Where is it? In other words, where do your rockfalls occur? That would also be a lower order question. It will definitely be on steep slopes. It will definitely be in areas where there are lots of rocks. A rockfall can't occur where there are no rocks to be found. So when you have rocks, whether they are smaller rocks or large boulders, in an area where there's very little vegetation, where there are steep slopes, you can expect rockfalls to occur. That's also a lower order question. Now we move to the middle order questions. Why is it there? So here we have to explain why they occur. That is the question that you will get in the exam. In the exam, you won't be asked why do rockfalls occur here. It will be more of why do rockfalls occur in these specific locations. Explain how rockfalls occur. That is a what happened type of question, right? So now those are the middle order questions, the why and the what. And then the last three can range between middle and higher order. What does it look like? So you could be asked in your Mapwork paper, draw a cross section from X to Y on the topographical map and indicate where rockfalls will occur along the road. That's a higher order question, is it not? You are expected to draw, but what is being tested is what does it look like. You might get a question in the paper, give 3 impacts of rockfalls or 3 ways in which rockfalls affect human activities. That's a what is the impact type question. And then you could be asked in a paragraph of approximately 8 lines, explain what can be done to reduce the impact of rockfalls. And that is a how can it be managed question, and that's definitely a higher order question. Now these are the type of questions expected or that you can expect in most geography topics. So please, grade 11s, when you are studying, study with these questions in mind. What is it? Where is it? Why is it there? How did it occur? Study with these questions in mind. And if you can answer those questions for every single topic that you've got to study, you will be able to answer any question in the exam. And then all you have to do when you encounter a question, ask yourself, what question is this? Is this where is it? Is this what is it? Is this why does it occur here? Is this a how can we reduce the impact question? Okay? And once you can do that, once you get into the habit of doing that, you will find it so much easier to answer all the questions in your final paper. Right, now we're going to start looking at the paragraph type questions. We've covered short questions. We can identify the short questions. We know what to do when we encounter short questions. The data response questions, we've now looked at the various types of data response questions, and we know what to do when we encounter those questions. Now what we're going to do is to look at the paragraph type questions. So let's have a look at the slide. So within the paragraph type of questions, what do you do when you are required to write a paragraph? Firstly, you need to think. Critical thinking and analysis are required. You need to be able to think, what am I being asked? What is expected of me? How must I respond to this question? You need to take into account the length. They usually ask you to answer in 8 lines. And that's fine, but when we start looking at the number of lines, the problem that we have is that some people have teeny tiny handwritings and can write what others write in 8 lines, they can write it in 3 lines. And other people again have huge handwritings and can take up to 10 lines to write the same amount of work. So the size of your handwriting, the spacing that you use, etc., will determine the number of lines. What I would advise you to do is most of the time when you have a paragraph type question, your question at the end will say 4 times 2 and in brackets there will be an 8. What does that mean? 4 marks. I'll write it down for you quickly. This is what you will see at the end of the question. 4 times 2, 8. That is what you will see. And what does it mean? This means that you are required to give 4 facts. 2 marks per fact. And then the 8th there is your total marks for the question. So 4 facts, 2 marks per fact. Here's the 2. 2 marks per fact, 4 facts, and 4 times 2 gives me a total of 8 marks for the question. So when you are deciding on the length, 8 lines is generally the parameter. If you do it in 6 lines or 10 lines, you won't be penalized, but try to keep it as close to 8 lines as possible. Try not to go beyond that, because I've seen essays where candidates write 2, 3 full pages, and you are wasting time. Focus rather on, I need 4 facts to support my argument, whichever argument I'm going to use in answering this paragraph type question, and ensure that you have 4 facts. And if each fact covers 2 lines, that will give you 8 lines approximately in which to answer the question. So we need to consider the length of our answer. Then thirdly, when it comes to the way in which you write, it's a paragraph. You need sentences. You cannot be writing in single words. You need to answer in full sentences, but also to the point. Don't say the same thing over 5 times in different ways. Full sentences, but to the point. Then, ascertain how many parts there are to your question. I'll explain this part to you immediately after this. So I'm just going to move on. I'll come back to explain how many parts to you. Then, when you are answering, those of you that do history, you have an advantage because you've been taught how to answer essays and paragraph type questions. But for those of you that do not do history, bring a highlighter. Bring color pens and pencils with you into the exam. Highlight the main topic or underline it. Look for the action word. Identify the focus area. What is this about? I'm going to show you how to do that now. And then lastly, use the source that you are given. Well thought through answers are usually adapted from the source that is given to you. So let's look at a paragraph question. Here is a paragraph type question on globalization. And the question reads as follows. In a paragraph, so there I immediately know it's a paragraph question. It tells me, in a paragraph of how long? Approximately. Notice they don't say exactly, of approximately. So if it's 6 or 7 lines, or if it's 9 or 10 lines, that's approximately 8, that's fine. Describe, there's my action word. I've identified it, I underlined it in red. In this case, I typed it in red. But find the action word. I must describe something. In other words, I need to explain it. I must describe it. Full sentences. What must I describe? The positive and negative impacts of globalization on development. Notice, remember I spoke about the 1 thing or the 2 things or the 3 things earlier? The examiner is asking me to do 2 things. I must describe the positive impacts of globalization on development. Then I must also describe the negative impacts of globalization on development. Now learners, listen to me very carefully. 4 times 2, 8 marks. If you give 4 positive impacts, and all 4 those positive impacts are correct, and I'm marking your paper, you will only get 6 of the 8 marks. I will give you, for 3 of the positive impacts, I will give you 2 marks, 2 marks, and 2 marks. Why am I not giving you the full 8 marks? You have 4 positive impacts, because the question clearly states, discuss or describe the positive as well as the negative. So you can give 3 positive and 1 negative, or 2 positive, 2 negative, or 1 positive, 3 negative. But you need to look at both sides of the coin, because that is what you are asked to do. If you were only asked, discuss the impacts of globalization on development, then you could give just positive or just negative, or a mixture of the two. But the question specifically stated both the positive and the negative, so there are 2 parts to this question, and you need to ensure that you refer to both the positive and the negative in your answer. So, full sentences. When I see in a paragraph tells me my answer's got to be full sentences. There's the length, approximately 8 lines, 4 facts. There's my action word. What must I do? I need to describe the main characteristics. I must give an account. I must explain. Both the positive and the negative. So there are 2 parts to my answer. And that is the context, specifically to globalization. I mustn't speak only about development. I mustn't give the impacts of the World Cup on development. I mustn't give the impact of something else, but of globalization specifically on development. Because there are other factors that influence development as well, but the factor that is being tested here is your knowledge of how globalization impacts on development, both positively and negatively. And that is how we unpack the paragraph type question. Please practice doing this. Now, when it comes to your data response questions, what are the types of data that is generally used? Maps, diagrams, case studies, statistics or graphs, infographics and cartoons. And we are very, very briefly going to look at each of these types of data. Now, learners, I can tell you, when you get a data response question, and the common thing that you're going to pick up at each of these is that before you even look at the questions, whether it's a map, whether it's a diagram, whether it's a case study, etc., look at the data that you are given. If it's a paragraph, read the paragraph. If it's a newspaper article, read it. Don't look at the questions yet. If it's a map, look at the map. Try to figure out, what is this map showing me? What can I learn from this map? If it's a graph, have a look. What is this graph showing me? And 9 out of 10 times, by doing that, you can anticipate the questions that are going to be asked. You can say, okay, here, I can already see I'll probably be asked this, that, or the other. And you will notice that when you look at the questions afterwards, those are generally the questions that you will be asked. And it makes it so much easier for you to answer. So don't look at the questions initially. Study the data that is given to you, and then answer the question. So let's have a look at each one of these types of data individually. So always read the data. That is what I told you. More or less 5 minutes. You've got more than enough time. You have 3 hours to answer your question paper. So use about 5 minutes just to read, to look at the data. Right? This will give you a mental image of the information, as I said, and it will help you to anticipate the questions which are going to be asked. Now, when it comes to maps, here's a map showing me the location of the power stations. That is the title. So it's showing me where the different types of power stations are found in South Africa. So immediately I know that we are looking at the section dealing with energy, with the production of electricity in South Africa, etc., etc. Read the text. In this case, there's only 2 lines. Most of the power stations in South Africa are located in the interior? That's a possible question. Read the labels. In this case, your labels are the names of towns and cities and the names of specific power stations. Have a look at the key. And these are showing me the type. So power stations 1 through to 4, Newcastle, Sasolburg, Witbank, Lepelala, etc. Those are thermal power stations. That's where they're burning coal to generate electricity. Then from 5 to 9, those are the hydroelectric power stations. They are situated along rivers, where there are dams built on rivers. And then I also see that there's one nuclear power station which is found here in the Western Cape, which is known as Koeberg. So that's the key. And when we do this, we anticipate the type of questions that are going to be asked, and we'll be able to answer the questions much better. When it comes to graph and statistics, you've got a simple table, the production of electricity in South Africa, and I can see that through the burning of coal, we produce 92% of our electricity. Nuclear power produces 5%, so that one power station that we saw on the map at Koeberg produces 5% of all the electricity in South Africa. And then all those hydroelectric power stations that we saw, they generate 2%. And then those are usually your alternative, like wind energy and solar power, etc. They produce 1%. So I can anticipate the type of questions that can be asked based on the table that was given. Okay, that's statistics. Then there's a graph. There's a simple pie graph showing me this has nothing to do with electricity. This is a different topic. Here we're looking at development, and we're looking at developed countries 40% and developing countries 60%. Right? I didn't give a context to this graph, but it was just a simple graph that I gave you. And once again, you need to, when dealing with data and statistics, there are 5 things that you need to take cognizance of. What information is shown in the statistics? What's the title? What's the tendency? Is it upwards or downwards? Now, grade 11s, when you see the word tendency or trend with regard to statistics, to data, to a graph, the tendency or the trend can be one of 3 things. Is it increasing? Whatever is being displayed in this graph, is it going upwards? Is it decreasing? Or is it remaining constant? So when you are asked to describe the tendency or the trend, your answer is going to be one of 3 words. The trend or the tendency is increasing, there's upward movement, or it is decreasing, there's a downward movement, or it's remaining the same, it is level. Then, very important, when you are giving a value, you need to include the units. 5 millimeters, 10 degrees Celsius. If the answer is 5 millimeters, for example, and you only write 5, that answer is going to be marked wrong and you're going to lose marks. 10 degrees Celsius, you only write down the word 10, that answer is wrong, it will be marked wrong. Even though the value you gave was correct, by not adding the units, you are losing those marks, and it's something that you knew. Then, when you interpret statistics, you can often be asked to predict something. What do you predict will happen within the next 10 years? So you look at what has been happening up to this point, and then you look at the tendency, is it upwards or downwards, and then you use that to predict what will be happening in the future. And then lastly, there can also be questions based on content. So using the data, using the graph or the table, you can then be asked questions based on content that you have studied in the classroom. When you get an extract or a case study, here's a case study on renewable energy. I'm not going to read through the entire thing now. But firstly, this is not a comprehension test. It's not like in English where you've got the comprehension test, where every single answer has to come from the extract or from the case study. You can extract answers from there, but all your answers will not come from the case study. Rather, the case study or the extract is used to set the scene on which your questions will be based. And a small number of the answers will be in the extract, and sometimes the extract will point us in the right direction, but all your answers will not come from the case study. Here are 5 questions based on that previous case study. So define renewable energy. Then give 2 examples. That's a lower order question. It's a definition. The answer was not in the extract. You had to know the definition. 2 examples of renewable energy. That's also a lower order. Both examples you could have gotten from that extract. Why is the burning of fossil fuel dangerous? It is referred to in the text, but not the entire answer. You can get part of the answer from the text, but you also have to elaborate and use the information that you know. Why does renewable energy generate more jobs? Once again, a middle order question that is referred to in the text, but you need to take what is in the text and elaborate and add to it. And then the last question on that extract is a paragraph where you are asked to discuss the advantages and disadvantages of wind energy. It's a higher order question. It is not in the text. It's an application where you are required to apply your knowledge to answer a particular question. It's an application type of question, and that is how we approach extracts. Then infographics. These are becoming more and more popular, and we know that an infographic is a collection of images, graphs, and statistics that gives an overview of a topic, and it's given on 1 page usually. And when I look here, I can see there's a text, there's an image, which is the map in this case, and there's a graph. Okay? There's more than 1 graph. So how do we deal with infographics? In exactly the same way. Get an idea of what this infographic is telling you. What are the different types of information that are given? Ask yourself that question. Read the written information first. That normally gives you an overview of what this thing is all about. And then look at the other information and see how it ties in with what is written down. Look for links between them. Okay? So, there's the infographic. There are the questions. The first question is, what is the brunt line? There the brunt line is. That's something you must know. You can't get that from the infographic. So you know that the brunt line is the line that divides the rich north and the poor south. 2 characteristics of developed countries. There we get it from the text. Answers in the text there. In which hemisphere is the population more urbanized? We can get that question from the little pie graphs, from the graphs that are given. Which country in the southern hemisphere forms a part of the rich north? So I'm going to look south of the equator for that answer, and it's got to be north of the brunt line, and the answer there would be Australia. Then compare the sectors in which people work in developed and developing countries, and that answer I can get from that little table showing me primary, secondary, and tertiary activities, and in that way I could then answer all the questions in the infographic. Cartoons, the same thing. It's not just a cartoon. In the cartoons, we need to look at the heading. We need to look at the labels. We need to look at the captions, the symbolism. So I can see here, there's Africa. Africa's symbolized or depicted as small, weak, being held back by that heavy metal ball, versus they're going to be fighting against the developed countries. It's a boxing match, and Africa is going to be fighting against the developed countries. Developed countries are big and huge and strong, and they've got the backing of the world. I can see the symbolism in this particular question. What's the message of this cartoon? Identify the information that you need. And then very lastly, I'm just going to rush through this quickly. When it comes to the Mapwork section, you can expect a topographical map and an orthophoto map. They're usually A3 in size. 30 marks, we've mentioned this already. 10 marks on skills, 12 marks on interpretation, and 8 marks on GIS. And my last slide, when you are answering the questions, your teacher would have used the RDICE method of answering questions. When it comes to relief, you look for brown. When it comes to drainage questions, you look for blue. Questions regarding the infrastructure will be in red, settlement in grey, your economic activities in green. And when you come to the exam room, when it comes to Mapwork, ensure that you have a pencil, an eraser, a ruler, a protractor, a calculator, and if you have one, a magnifying glass. If your eyes are as bad as mine, sometimes what you see on the map is very, very small, and that magnifying glass is needed. So grade 11s, we've come to the end of our presentation for this afternoon. Thank you for staying. The Afrikaans learners, Mr. Samai, will now be doing the same presentation that I did, but in Afrikaans for the Afrikaans speaking learners. Educators, thank you for giving up your time to remain after school with the learners, and I wish you all very, very well as you prepare for the final exam. Thank you and good afternoon.